Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journeys, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2024. And I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on a brilliant, remarkable multi-disc set which was released by Criterion earlier this year. This set is designated by Criterion collectively at spine number 1203. And it is right here. This is the set which is Chantal Akerman Masterpieces 1968 to 1978. And it is focusing in on the filmmaker artist extraordinaire Chantal Akerman and a number of her works covering the scope of years that's indicated in the title of this set. It's a really great set, and we are going through the works that are included in this great set. So that brings us to a work which is again part of this set, and it is described as being from the year 1971. The director is Chantal Akerman, and the name of the film is, and please, once again, please pardon me for my incredibly poor and terrible pronunciation of the language, but I hope you can forgive me, but I will do my very best. The name of the work is L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée. The work, another incredibly thought-provoking, remarkable work from the director, the filmmaker artist extraordinaire Chantal Akerman, and this is described as being from the year 1971, and this is a short work in terms of its running time. It's described in the Criterion materials as being 32 minutes. It's also described in the Criterion materials as being written and directed by Chantal Akerman, with the cast, with the people who are appearing in the work being Claire Waltium and Daphna Merze, and also Chantal Akerman. And this is the work which is, and once again, please pardon me for my very abysmal, terrible pronunciation of the language. I hope you can forgive me. I really do. I really hope you can forgive me. But the name of the work is L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée. So, L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée. And according to the Criterion materials as well, this can be translated into English, or one possibility of translating it, one possible translation into English of this title could be, for example, The Beloved Child, or I Play at Being a Married Woman. So a very interesting title, which I think says very much, and it could be interpreted as being quite relevant to the exchanges or scenarios that we see gathered together in this short work from Chantal Akerman, because we see perhaps immediately, or welcome us immediately, or almost immediately, certain, say, environments or scenarios or situations involving what appears to be a house, a countryside house perhaps, with three people that are appearing. So first is a woman who is portrayed by Claire Waltium, and a young girl. This is Daphna, and we hear the woman calling out to Daphna, both as part of the soundtrack and also almost immediately a kind of interesting exchange between this woman and the young girl. And so we can interpret, or we can understand that there is perhaps a close bond between them. One can assume that perhaps this is a mother-daughter relationship. But in any event, we do understand that this woman well, we see almost immediately too this woman in this in getting dressed and having a conversation with the young girl in a very, I think, a very affectionate way, but it's also a very playful way. But also in terms of a mother-daughter relationship, which I think can be reasonably interpreted here. What's interesting already off the bat here is the mother-daughter relationship dynamic, even in this playful gesture type of way, seem to have its roles reversed. Because if you note from the dialogue exchange between the woman and the young girl as they're dressing and she's standing in front of the wardrobe with the mirror in what appears to be a bedroom, the young girl, the little girl, seems to be talking to the woman in a way that is very motherly. So the child's words, maybe in this playful role-playing sort of way, mind you, but still in this way that seems to be quite motherly. And so already we can get from this the notion of Chantal Akerman and company here, perhaps trying to not just consider the idea of roles and societal roles, not just societal roles, but also those that are intimately derived, that is sort of the kind of an innate bond between parents and children, in this case perhaps mother and daughter on the one hand, and yet how sometimes we can have a type of adopting of different perspectives and standpoints to really examine or perhaps re-examine or reconsider what these roles really mean, and sort of the intimacy of bonds even between this woman and the little girl. And so already we have some, I think, very thought-provoking activity going on here. But this is not the end of the case, of course, because other things that are going on do involve Chantal Akerman, who also appears, and then we have interesting exchanges where sometimes the three of them are involved. The woman that we see in front of the wardrobe dressing, and then Chantal Akerman, and then the little girl. Maybe we see them in outside, what appears to be outside of this house structure. Stories or storytelling. Santa Claus is mentioned. There's also some instances, perhaps later on, involving hide and seek games. The child hiding, and then the women have to try to find where the child is hiding. So there are these aspects of playing or role playing, which or kind of storytelling where children are involved. Thus, it's the idea of playing or playfulness, banter, as well as games and being engaged in games, as well as the idea of role playing, the mother-daughter relationship, role reversal, role playing that I was referring to earlier. So there's already a kind of playful, almost joyful atmosphere that I think is suggested here. I mean, akin to the very title itself, or the latter half of the title anyway, L'Enfant aimé, ou Je joue, I play, je joue à être une femme mariée. But that also, I think, lends itself really nicely and wonderfully complexly to another possible interpretation of this, meaning the idea of roles, how integral to these roles are to the actuality of the moment. Case in point, maybe the intimacy of the mother-daughter relationship that we might interpret that is going on here. Also, the intimacy between the two women as they are talking. Specifically, I should say, as the Claire Waltion character seems to be talking to the Chantal Akerman character, because as we discover throughout the work, we find that it is the Claire Waltion character, or the performance here, that seems to be doing the talking and also doing the presenting. Whereas the Chantal Akerman character, or the appearance, seems to be the position that of, I don't want to call her position that of a passive observer, but someone who is listening, someone who is a companion, someone who is very willing to hear the say various things that might be on the mind of this other woman, Claire. And one of the things that we do see in exchange is how the woman is talking about what it is we can assume to be the married life and relationship with this man in her life who is off screen. We don't see this man, but we do get a little bit of the conversation and dialogue from the woman to Chantal Akerman about maybe some dissatisfaction in the sex life, maybe some dissatisfaction both also physically and emotionally that is also being expressed. And that too links perhaps, maybe, possibly, to other modes of scenes and scenarios that we see also as the film plays itself out. For instance, we see at some other points this woman who is seen, say, maybe in the kitchen, doing what appears to be chores in the kitchen or kind of ritual manners or mannerisms that are taking place, and query whether or not this can be linked to an earlier dialogue, again, about dissatisfaction, both maybe physically, sexually, and emotionally. Whether this type of scenes involving certain rituals or mannerisms in the house, whether that might have any direct correlation with a type of dissatisfaction or not, as the case may be, because I think one of the great things about Chantal Akerman's works, starting with the earlier work Saute ma ville and then continuing on through works like this, L'Enfant aimé ou JOUE êTRE une femme mariée, is that I think the idea of roles and rituals, as we see, for instance, this woman doing certain activities in the kitchen, we might take from that a type of negative connotation, or maybe a type of a cynical take on maybe the dangers of, for lack of a better phrase, a type of complacency in domesticity, for instance. Or we might take that to be quite the opposite, which is as a type of moment of reality, or not reality, but moment of being oneself. Because these are moments where the woman is being filmed, of course, but it's not filmed in a way that is suggestive of, say, a documentary or quasi-documentary, at least. I mean, perhaps it could be seen as maybe a quasi or an actual documentary or a cinema verite type of mode, but it can also be seen as something where the camera is not consciously there in the minds of the people who we see being portrayed on screen as we watch this film. So in that latter mode of viewing this film interpretation, one can interpret the scenes, say, in the kitchen or other parts of the house, to be that of this character portrayed by Claire Waltion, to be herself and her own, say, direct inner monologue, connecting thus with her very intimate feelings, even over the daily or the mundane. Still, very intimate feelings about herself, what she's feeling and thinking and doing at the moment, and how that is thus connected to us via the screen, via the cinema of Chantal Akerman. So I think that type of possible different interpretation is very thought-provoking and incredibly very much insightful, and carries on conversations that I think extend not just within the boundaries of this work, but also extend towards other points of Chantal Akerman's filmography. I mean, I think we can see a lot of that in Saute ma ville, the earlier film that we talked about, namely the idea of certain mannerisms or rituals, but perhaps those mannerisms or rituals in that work, as they gradually progressed or digressed, if one depends on how one refers it, to a state of maybe a sense of chaos and anarchy, and or a sense of freedom and liberation, whether that had a positive or negative connotation. I think a similar type of possibility of differing viewpoints could also be made, even in these seemingly quote-unquote quiet moments that we see the characters here, specifically the Claire Walton character, engage with. But that's not the only example. We also have, I think, one of the most famous examples of this in the film involves the same woman who is standing from a different angle here, but the same, or we assume is the same mirror that we see earlier on in the film. But here she is in a state of undress, and so it is an incredibly intimate and vulnerable state that she is in. But she's looking at the mirror at herself, and we hear her talking about parts of her body in this objective way, almost also in a way that's very critical of maybe how her body looks physically, and maybe a sense of perhaps a kind of dissatisfaction in terms of how one part looks or another part looks and the like. And so this also, I think, is a very thought-provoking mode of cinema exploration on the part of Chantal Akerman and company, because like before, we have various possibilities, I think, occurring here, namely the idea of a type of spotlight on objectification. And so the idea here being we see or we hear this woman essentially maybe taking a look at her body and casting a downward, wholly and quite cynical objective viewpoint that could be said to be maybe imposed upon her through various, say, externally applied societal norms, the idea of the place of women in society, a sort of look at femininity and feminism that might regard certain societal mores or as being somewhat oppressive. And that type of viewpoint could then lend itself, unfortunately, to the idea of a kind of self-deprecating viewpoint, which has a self-damaging result. And so that could be one way of looking at this, as a type of the person objectifying herself, because this is the unfortunate byproduct of a type of externally applied oppressive social mores that is affecting her role as a woman. And the expression of her own femininity through her eyes, which may be quite affected by the society that she lives in. So that's, I think, one possibility. But another possibility too is that there is a very earnest and very critical eye that she is glancing and gazing at herself, towards herself. And there is a possibility that it could be an earnest and quite honest, from her point of view, perspective on her own body and how she looks. And so I think the idea of the camera and the camera positioned the way it is, I think, lends itself to perhaps one possibility or another possibility, or perhaps a combination of the two. And so are we seeing something that is a kind of externally applied oppressive look at objectification of women in this state from the viewpoint of a woman who is herself regarding herself, thus making that case for oppression even more, I think, more what's the phrase? It takes so much to take a self-deprecating stance. I mean, therefore, the level of oppression must be so great and so intense if it forces one to be self-deprecating. So it's that type of level of scrutiny that, or that type of level of oppression that gives rise to this type of self-deprecating scrutiny. Is that what we're talking about, or are we talking about something that is truly or wholly something that is honest and earnest from the woman about herself to herself, and perhaps to us as well? I think the possibilities are it could be either or perhaps a combination of both, or maybe some other possibilities as well. But the point that I wanted to bring is that this is another great example of I think, very carefully applied ambiguity that is given voice here in terms of Akerman's cinema. I mean, it is, as it's mentioned somewhere in the other supplements, which we'll talk about in a separate video. I mean, one thing to keep in mind too is that this film is a great reminder, just like Sotmaville was before and other films later that we'll talk about. But this film is a great reminder of how one of the concerns about Chantal Akerman and her cinema is, among other things, how she is depicting women and the women that are part of the tableau of the films and the stories and the environments that she's shooting and filming and capturing on in her cinema. And therefore, that I think brings about it a number of questions and a number of approaches and philosophies that she is espousing or seemingly espousing. So, for instance, the place of the camera and the role of the camera. Is the camera a type of subjective stand in for the characters that we see play themselves out on screen? Or is it a type of objective, separate entity that is meant to suggest the objectification of someone that we are seeing? Now, even if it's the objectification, I don't think that Chantal Akerman is herself casting a kind of a deprecating eye upon the subjects that she is filming. I think, on the contrary, she has a very caring and direct and emotional connection to all the people that appear in her works, including this work, because you can feel it. You can feel the closeness between the two of them, especially since Chantal Akerman, in a number of the scenes, too, appears herself listening as an observer, as a companion to some of the dialogue and perhaps even inner monologues of Claire Waltium. But it is possible, I think, to then take the camera, the position of the camera, and this film being an example, as maybe a commentary on the oppressive nature of social mores that really cast a type of objectification upon women to the point where they might even be forced to be compelled to deprecate themselves. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But also there is a way in which the camera is capturing the very intimate and things that are perhaps closed off to other people in the periphery. For instance, the man in her life that she's speaking about a little bit early in the work with Chantal Akerman, and sort of the dissatisfaction that she appears to have with this man. So this could be perhaps a way of saying to us, the camera, Chantal Akerman's camera, is doing many things, and one such thing is perhaps capturing the intimate in a way that nothing else can. And so I think in that way, what we are, I think, confronted with in a very bold way as viewers of this work is considering each image or considering each scenario and situation from varying perspectives, I think, simultaneously and all at once. So we are asked to consider whether the motions of quote unquote cynical showings of complacency in domesticity, all the way down to the way that the papers rustle and the plates clang and the footsteps are echoing on the floor, which is again indicating of the importance of the soundtrack here, which is an interesting contrast with the earlier work, Saute ma vie. There are some similarities and differences in terms of how soundtrack is used, but one thing here is that there seems to be more in terms of recorded sound and voice. The question is, which is I think a really profound question, is whether that can be said to be augmenting this aspect of a complacency and domesticity, or is it, which itself could be a kind of hollow echo, or is it hallmarking or calling or otherwise establishing or otherwise announcing kind of earnest, say, expression of even in terms of the most quote-unquote mundane or the most quote-unquote ordinary. Are these moments still moments of the individual expressing themselves the way that they can, perhaps through the various grammar that we see made available to them in a given, say, environment? And that grammar here could be the symbols of things in the household, the boudoir, the dresser, and the wearing of the dressing and wearing of the clothes, the activities in the kitchen, also the playing and the role playing hide and seek games with the child, and how that also maybe might be said to be an echo of the relationship status and the psychological state of the women or women, because there are more than one here in this instance, or that whether that might be some kind kind of maybe a paradoxical play in terms of a type of idyllic innocence on the one hand, but sort of a cynical reminder of how things are quite different from this idyllic innocence on the other. So that type of interplay, I think, is very powerful and very important and quite profound indeed. And it's all wrapped in this work very succinctly within its 30 minutes or so. That being the work that is L'Enfant aimé, ou Je joue à être une femme mariée. The Criterion Collection has released this work, L'Enfant aimé, ou Je joue à être une femme mariée, as part of this wonderful set, which is Chantal Akerman Masterpieces 1968 to 1978. It can be found on Blu-ray disc #1, and it is in fact the second film to be found on Blu-ray disc #1. Yeah, there are no supplements linked to specifically to the film L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée. So when you press it on the Blu-ray menu, it'll take you straight to the opening of the film. So there are no L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée specific supplements on here. But there are some mentionings of it elsewhere. So when we talk about the set overall, as well as some of the other supplements in a separate video, we might touch upon some of those details, but just please keep that in mind. The booklet from Criterion accompanying this wonderful set, it's a wonderful booklet, by the way. We'll also talk about some of the contours of this in a separate video, but in the context of this work, L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée, it does say, for instance, about the presentation on pages 42, or on page 42 of the booklet. It says here about how, I quote, restorations of all the films were undertaken by Cinematheque, Royal Film Archive of Belgium, except for one of the films which we'll talk about later. And then with respect to this work, it says here around, let's see, the third line in the second paragraph on page 42, around the middle of that third line, it says, and I quote, for L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée, a 16mm duplicate positive was scanned in 2K resolution, with the original monaural soundtrack remastered from the 16mm magnetic final mix. So, I mean, it looks really quite wonderful. And I should point out something here too, which is, and maybe we might talk about this a little bit later as we progress through the other works of this amazing set. But what I like about the way it looked, L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée, the way it looked and sounded, was that it still had the sense of being, it wasn't overly sharpened or overly quote unquote cleaned up, end quote. I like how it feels very rough and I don't know if it's the appropriate word, but grungy. I like that look because it really, that type of roughness in the way that it looks, I think that is akin to the quality of 16mm inherently. I think that's very important from a psychological perspective, from the viewpoint of the viewer, or for instance, taking my own subjective case myself, as I view it, because it really suggested to me a kind of, for lack of a better phrase, fly on the wall aesthetic, which I think is very much apropos this type of examination. I think because after all, if one of the objectives, one can say, of a work like this by Chantal Akerman is to try to capture a sense of intimacy of the moment, either if it's between these two women or if it's Claire Wiltern's character herself as a type of inner monologue perspective. I think if that's the case, then this type of almost 16mm rough quality, end quote, I think, really lends itself to this intimacy and yet distance. And I use the word distance in a very positive way, because there is a way in which I think we can recognize that even if we espouse the view at Chantal Akerman's work here, and the positioning of the camera is meant to capture the essence of the moment as a kind of truly authentic moment, we also have to recognize and acknowledge that there is only so much that can accomplish. And you know, film is film and cinema is cinema, and there might even be this type of invisible wall. But perhaps that's more appropriate than one might realize. And so I think in this instance, there are things that we can know, but there are things that we as the other, as people who are outside of the people that are part of this world or that are subject of this film, things that we will never know, we can only assume. So that type of intimacy yet distance is maybe one of the great purposely applied contradictions that is, I would suggest, very existent in this work, L'Enfant aimé ou je joue êtres une femme mariée. And so the way that the 16mm look is preserved is something that I respect very much, because it enables me the ability to maybe maintain that cinematic illusion in my mind as I watch this. So bravo for that. I think it really looks and sounds quite good indeed. Also, I will talk to a little bit later about, as I mentioned in a separate video, about the comprehensive nature of the writings and essays here. This is a great booklet. There's a great essay here talking about the set and the films overall, Beatrice Loiza. But there are also writings specific to the works, and not just plot synopses, but actual little essays or mini essays. And so that's what I really enjoy about when Criterion does this with its multi-film sets. Sometimes they'll write synopses to the films, which is fine. I really admire synopses, but when Criterion releases a set that has its own little mini critical essay accompanying each of the works, that makes me very happy and excited indeed. Criterion did that, for instance, with the Pasolini 101 set, if you recall. Not just, it had little mini essays on each of the films, which was great. And so here is another continuation of that tradition, little mini essays accompanying each of the works. So on pages 16 and 17, you will find a critical essay on L'Enfant aimé ou je joue êTRE une femme mariée. So there are some great points that are mentioned here, for instance, about the idea of gaze and recognition of the camera, or perhaps trying to avoid recognition of the camera. There are points where the camera is recognized by, maybe there's a little look or glance this way by some of the people who are in the film itself. So there's this idea maybe of a not so strictly lined up sense of quote-unquote narrative and documentary, but there's maybe a blurring of the lines, which is an interesting way of then furthering the conversation about the role and placement of the camera in Chantal Akerman's filmography, as this film could be a great example of. But that point is touched upon in this mini critical essay, which is great, as well as a translation or possible translation of the title into English. And then also how this could be said to be another great step in terms of the furtherance of the filmography of Chantal Akerman. So recalling the earlier work, the great work Saute ma vie. Here, this time, we have again the focus on not just one woman here, Chantal Akerman, like we did in Saute ma vie, but we have another woman, Claire Wathion, and Chantal Akerman is standing in here, although one can say that she is a listener here, and the focus of attention could be on the Claire Wathion character instead. And then also there's a child here that's involved, which is another step that distinguishes this from the earlier work. And also the soundtrack, too, the use of sounds. We had a soundtrack that was interestingly applied in Saute ma vie in that earlier film. Here we have recorded sound, the dialogue we see and hear as it's being spoken, etc. And so this, I think, is another added dimension here throughout the I like this phrase here, I quote here on page 17, a mental echo chamber of one of the characters' own making, whether that is a kind of commentary about the oppressive nature of this type of depiction of what one might interpret as being a sense of boredom in domesticity, or perhaps is it some kind of calling out of an authentic feeling of the individual in a given moment. I think the essay maybe leans in one direction or the other, but it invites both interpretations, at least possibly speaking anyway. So that and other reasons, I think, make the mini essay here quite invaluable and remarkable and great. So Beatrice Loiza's writings here is they're fantastic. So once again, the writing and some information on the cast and crew, as well as a shot from the film itself. can be found on pages 16 and 17 of the booklet, again for the film. That is L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée. And once again, please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the language, but I hope you can forgive me. Whew. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. So as you can see, I am far from being in any way, shape, or form an expert when it comes to the works of Chantal Akerman. I am indeed very shallow when it comes to my own knowledge base on this, and indeed on any film, really. I don't know anything. But it's sets like this, the Criterion set, and the inclusion of this film in that set, which really helps me to have my own perspective or give me a little bit of guidance and context into the films of this incredible filmmaker, Chantal Akerman. So I am well on my way in terms of my own Akerman film journey. And part of that has been an engagement with this extraordinary work, L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée. So, in any event, my dear friends, we will continue our conversations with regard to the other films in this set. Chantal Akerman masterpieces, 1968 to 1978. So, if you're interested, my dear friends, I look forward to seeing you at the next video on this topic. But in any event, and until the next one, please continue to be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including the works of Chantal Akerman, including other films in the Criterion Collection and beyond. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.